Hi everyone, how you going? Hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world. This is so I'm not sure if I'm going to go long or short today, so it is what it is. Um, Hope you're all well. Hope you're doing great. And I thought I'd just do this addendum onto yesterday's ones about judgments because it's kind of related. It kind of followed on from that one. Because when it comes to having difficult conversations, um, we usually start building up the anxiety in our mind as to what it could look like, what it's going to sound like, what it's going to feel like. And we do this whole weird multi scenario type thing of what if they say that, what if they think that, what if they don't like me, what if they hate me, what if they do this, and that type of thing. And it's one of those things that our species is able to do is just basically create stress and anxiety out of pretty much thin air. Just from you haven't even had the conversation yet. You're just thinking about having the conversation, and you start having all these ideas and scenarios run through your mind as to how it could play out. What if this? What is that? Kind of thing. When you really kind of to calm that, you basically need to take a few steps back and try to understand that the hard part here isn't the conversation you want to have with them, it's the conversation you need to have with yourself. Okay? And usually that's a tougher thing, which is why we focus so much on the conversation with others. And then we kind of avoid having that hard conversation with ourselves, and we think, oh yeah, we've done enough to have the hard conversation with them, and we kind of fuck it up and make it worse, right? So if you want to make hard conversations with other people easier, work out first exactly what the struggle is internally and having the hard conversation with yourself. Like, you work that part out and you realize that the answers come really easy from that once you have the hard conversation with yourself. Now, a couple of it sounds really confusing, but it's not really. So, I at one stage wanted to reveal to Kelly that I was doing self sabotage behavior in relation to what I was eating. So most of the things we've had eaten and stuff is 90% veggies, 5% fruit, and 5% meat. And I was kind of cheating a little bit on that by having a chocolate here and there, right? And I was imagining this thing because we have been quite firm on that on our household, and I had imagined all these different scenarios as to how that conversation would go. Even though we have great communication and everything, and I realised that this isn't really like myself, especially the last few years. And I was like, okay, what am I actually doing here? And I took a few steps back, and I realized that it was a very old thing that had snuck in and stayed there, where when I was younger, my parents would never let me choose anything or select anything, or just I had to hide my wants, my um, basically my wants. I had to hide them. You know, like just the normal kid things of you take a biscuit, you try to make it look like the packet was already like that empty kind of thing. Even though you've just raided that biscuit packet like 5 times, you're still trying to make the biscuit packet look like that and stuff. This is like when I was at my parents' place many, many, many years ago. Anyway, I was able to trace it back to that behaviour as to not feeling like I could make that little choice out in the open. And so once I discovered that, then I was able to tell Kelly that, hey, I've been having this problem where I was sabotaging my own choices, and that's why I had not lost as much weight as I was aiming to. And once we identified that, she was like, well, that makes a lot of sense, and yeah, and that type of thing. So we already know that our communication level is quite good, so I knew that the ideas of that conversation were being much worse and stupid compared to what was actually going to be that conversation when it actually occurred. But I needed to have the conversation with myself first in order to make it so that that communication went really well, where I could offer Kelly a coffee or a tea, and we sit down and talk about the thing that I just revealed about myself. Okay, that type of thing. Another one was, I think I actually mentioned this in one of the live videos last week, where we had a particular friend of ours who owed us some resources in exchange for some renovation and things that we'd done for their place. And it had been quite a while. Like, since we finished that particular project, we haven't actually heard from him, and there was no attempts being made to pay up, basically. You know, and so once Kelly and I had the discussion with ourselves and then with each other, we realised, you know what, it's about time now and stuff that we actually rang them and said, look what's going on, kind of thing. But we needed to have that conversation with ourselves first, because like no one really likes the idea of you know pay up kind of thing. No one likes that, right? Especially when it's been a while, especially when it's a friend. Okay, so once we had the conversation with ourselves and then had the conversation with each other as to, well, do you think this particular idea will work and stuff, that of like it's time to call them and stuff, then it went to the thing of making the call. So, hey, it's been a while, and we're friends, and we didn't really want this weird awkwardness to build up when it happens and stuff, when this type of thing happens. And we actually just went up front with the things that we actually discussed with ourselves of, these are the things we don't want, right? We want a friend that will actually be forthcoming and actually say, this is what's going on, this is the circumstances, and you know, it's just the way it is, and look, we will get it to you as soon as possible. We haven't forgotten you. I think I actually had that conversation with a friend of ours today, actually, where I left a message for them and said, look, I would like to catch up, and they finally got a chance to call me back today, and I was saying, look, haven't forgotten about you, haven't forgotten about the assistance you offered with a property development project a while back, and so it's all going to be covered. And they go, look, we had no doubts, but thank you for letting us know. You know? But it's the thing of, like, if we let these things build up in our minds first and we don't have that difficult conversation with ourselves, it's a lot harder to soothe that, and usually it doesn't come out nearly as well. But we've found every single time of using the approach of having the difficult conversation with ourselves first, then deciding whether or not to have a conversation with the other, right? It goes so much smoother, okay? There is an exception to this though, right? We can have the conversation to ourselves, right, and work out, okay, there's an internal frustration here that's been building. There's extra thoughts of extra anxiety type thoughts building around the potential for a conversation. What's actually going on, right? So we still have the conversation with ourselves, right, and we realize, hold on, I'm actually frustrated because this, and this, and this, and it's happened this way before with this type of personality. However, the only solution that worked with that type of personality is to actually just leave it and wait for their frustration with themselves to build up, or just leave it all together and call it the loss, like the cost of the lesson, right? And a lot of the times, especially with difficult personalities that are incredibly stubborn or incredibly, let's say, just self-centered and nasty, right? You leave those types of personalities alone and call it the cost of the lesson, and it's so much easier to get on with your day. All right? If you can put the idea of, you know what, I should know better than to have participated with that particular person in that particular way, right? And from the circumstances I know of them, it's not likely that they're going to, one, admit to that, and two, pay it up even if it was brought to their attention. So how about I just list that as cost of the lesson, and in future, when that particular person or that particular whatever says, look, can you do this, right, can you do this, it's basically a no, I cannot. And you leave it at that. You know, you don't have to explain. You don't have to come up with excuses. You can actually say, look, I can't actually do that. you know, and there from that point there, you're actually putting a nice firm boundary. Okay, so even so the internal conversation with yourself soothes the anxiety, gets past the rambling scenarios that we'll go through internally, and actually allows you to think clearly as to, okay, what actually is, right? When you work out what actually is, you can determine from that whether it's the cost of the lesson or does the conversation have to be done. If the conversation has to be done and the conversation has to be had and it has to go from beginning all the way to end, then again, it's a case of you make them a coffee, you sit them down, and like every time you sit them down to have a serious conversation, right, you make sure that the conversation is always amicable and fairly smooth. And just by the act of sitting down with them, a lot of the time takes away a lot of the energy out of the thing. It takes the heat out of it. Alright, it's something in our biology that our body language responds a lot calmer when we're sitting. Okay? We each feel that we're being heard a lot better when we're sitting. Alright, especially if there's no TV around, mind you. We don't have a TV, so we don't have that extra distraction. Right, but to actually sit and have these conversations will do you wonders, and you'll realise what you want out of the as a result if you put that out front. Okay, I like the interaction we usually have. I don't want this to become awkward. I know historically some things like this can go out of control. However, also we understand that circumstances aren't always, favourable. Is there something that's going on your side of things that's preventing you from being able to do the reciprocation, whatever it is? Right? But the idea is if you have the difficult conversation with yourself, then you're actually working out what is it that yourself is after as a result to whatever the situation is. Right? And once you work out that, you basically put that in the opening part of the conversation, so you can have the conversation right there. It's nice, it's firm, it's direct, and there's no more of this sleepless nights type thing that can happen. Or the racing thoughts that can happen, and there's less of the overwhelm as well, right? So when you're feeling like you're really struggling to have a difficult conversation with someone else, understand that 99.999% of the time you need to have the difficult conversation with yourself first and actually sit with it, and you'll get the things you want as a result to be able to put into the actual physical conversation you need to have with the other person. Right? It sounds really weird, it sounds really roundabout, but it works every single time. And it's fantastic for negotiating, it's fantastic for peacekeeping, it's fantastic for building healthy boundaries with people, and just so many things like that. And there's less of the feeling of having to apologize, for things we don't need to apologize for, really. There are things that we need to apologize for in life, but most of the time we are doing these extra apologies for things we built up in our own minds, right? And so we open things up with, sorry, but, we don't actually have to do that once we learn this particular technique of dispersing the racing thoughts as we realize we're having them, And it does take a bit, it did take me a while to learn this particular trick myself as to how to recognize that I am having the racing thoughts in order to recognize that I needed to address them. It does take a bit, but at least, I can help with that. So, it really is a life-changing skill to be able to work out that when this is happening within you, that the difficult conversation you think you need to have is actually with yourself. So start with yourself, accept that it is that way, and it'll give you the better answers that you need for the real world conversation you're going to have, or it'll teach you exactly where you need to create better, healthier boundaries. Okay? Now, that's right. And the reason the reason this kind of leads on from yesterday is because yesterday I was speaking about judgments and how we actually make them all the time. Well, this is really where it leads, because when you're building your social circle to support you in creating a $3 million type home, $10 million type liquid cash lifestyle, and the health and relationships to support that, right? You're going to have to determine as to who's going to be with you, or at least included in the inner circle of information as you grow to that point. All right, because as you grow your resources and everything, people in your extended circle will realize over time that something's changed, right? And you need to identify which persons in your extended circle do you think are going to be okay with that. Some of them might be maybes, right? But their response to your success will be all the indication you need, you know? And it will open you up to having to have those difficult conversations, right? So I have an auntie as well that we put, like, boundaries don't always work with narcissists, especially, you know, but at the same time they're still doing the best that they can even when their best sucks, right? And my auntie is a covert type. We didn't realize that she was until we realized what her true motives were for staying around for so long. And we have since had those difficult conversations where it's not okay to do the things she did, you know, and thankfully that's been fairly respected and she's now stayed away. But a few years ago, when we told her that we didn't want her abusive partner to come with her when she traveled to come see us, she completely ignored that. And what we realize these days is sometimes when we speak, they can't actually hear. People can only hear at the level that they've already taught themselves to be ready to hear. Okay, it's the Indian ships on the shore scenario where when the first colonists from Europe met over to Southern America, right? The chieftain could see that there was a problem with the pattern of the water, but they couldn't actually see the ships off the shore for a good couple of days until his awareness was able to process particular parts as the smaller ships came in with the people, what do you call them, the dinghies and those type of things. You know, as they come closer and stuff, he was starting to recognize people, right, on these little boats and stuff. Once his awareness came enough into frame to understand their shapes, right, then the rest of the ships that were off the coast, off the shore and stuff, he was able to see. And then he had to have the difficult task of explaining that to his tribesmen, right? So what we didn't realize back then is that people that are not growing nearly as well as we'd like are not ready to receive all the information we have, and so they can only receive the information they're prepared for, and maybe just a little bit more to push that awareness up. So a lot of the times we'll find in our lives that when we thought we'd said something really nice and clear, something very nice and eloquent, then they did something completely opposite to that. It's not because they didn't you weren't speaking, it's that they couldn't understand what you said, kind of thing. It's a very interesting thing. But it's kind of like dog training, right? If you were to give your dog a command that it was never trained for, never ever heard in its life, you're not expecting the dog to actually follow that command, right? But if the dog's been already trained to sit, stay, and things of that nature, and it's already been trained to that, it's going to recognize those sounds. Because remember, anytime you're making noise, including when speaking, you're just making noise, right? The dog doesn't understand that you're saying actual words. You understand you're saying words, right? But if you're making a noise that it recognizes, it's going to respond to that, right? But if you make a noise that it doesn't understand, right, hasn't been trained for, it's going to just look at you funny or whatever, right? But it's kind of like that, right? So the people that are growing and they're learning, they're wanting to put pen to paper, they're wanting to action some improvements in their lifestyle and those types of things, right? You'll find them very open to new ideas, new concepts, and new strategies in order to do, and basically it's to make their life easier, really, and more productive, more wealthy, and all these types of things, right? But if someone's not trained to understand the benefits of learning and growth and mindset and health and those types of things, they won't be able to hear it. It's just going to be like white noise. So it's a lot. Once you understand the white noise concept in that way, it's a lot easier to allow ourselves to forgive particular persons. Like I was able to forgive my auntie for bringing a toxic person to our home, even when we told her not to. Right? She couldn't hear that. She didn't understand the command because she just thought, you know, her way or the highway kind of thing, or I don't know. She thought whatever she thought. You know, can't change that. Can't control other people. We can only learn from the other experiences that we give ourselves through this life experience. So, anyway, so these are some. When you might want to watch this one just a couple of times over, because the strategy of giving yourself the talk you need first will help you in basically every conversation you're struggling to have. If you've got a partner that you want to discuss things with, you're going to have to learn what it is that you really want as a result of that conversation. Alright? And you also need them to be able to sit and listen and respond healthily, so that, you know, because you don't want to turn. I don't think anyone really wants to turn their relationship into a fighting ground, because I believe we truly do choose people because we love and care and want to include them in our future. You know, I mean, I'm sure there's a couple of people out there and stuff that disagree, but like, that's up to them. You know, but the majority of us that want to have relationships for the long term, we're choosing to share our life experience with. So we would try to, if we can understand that it's us creating a team together kind of thing, versus you like fighting each other, then you're going to get a lot better results. You know, and it kind of explains though why most relationships only last 2 years, 9 months around the world. Why only 2% of the population around the world lasts 20 years and beyond. It's because a lot of people aren't willing to learn that level of patience and realize that they really do want to spend time with the person that they chose. Enough to put some work in and learn the communication skills. You know? And just because Kelly and I haven't had arguments really in the last 18, 19 years, doesn't mean we don't have difficult discussions. We've just learned how to have the difficult discussions without turning them into an argument. That's the difference. You know? So, anyway, I hope this helps. I hope you get a lot of value out of this, especially if you watch this a few times over and take some notes, because really it can really increase the value of your social circle, or at least increase the value of your future social circle as you build it. It's going to increase the strength of your relationships and actually make it so that your health, your relationships, your stress levels will come down, not just for yourself, but with your partner as well, your family, anyone you're sharing living space with. Your stress levels will come down because you've learned how to have the difficult conversations. Okay? There's still things to learn, like tact and timing, yes, you know, but like, I'll give you another last one before I log off for the day. And as far as tact and timing, you don't want to have a serious conversation with someone when they're in traffic. you know, especially if it could potentially be life changing. You wait until they're actually sitting and comfortable. You make them a coffee, a tea. You know, this is where Sheldon had it right all along. You make them a hot beverage, you know, and you sit them down and you have the conversations that you need to have. And that goes with most conversations. It doesn't have to be a serious one all the time. It could be something as simple as, I haven't seen you for a few days. How about we sit down and have a coffee and we just chat and catch up, right? Because if you can't do that on the simple things, how are they supposed to come and actually sit with you on the difficult things? You know? So you start building the habit of having conversations, like real conversations, over a hot beverage, over a hot coffee or a tea, or, you know, or even a cold one, you know, if you're still drinking, you know, or if you're just drinking water even, you know, you can sit around and drink water together, you know. But the idea is to take the extra fight energy out of the discussion and have it so that you're each actually communicating, which means you're actually letting the other person finish what they're saying before you speak, or you're speaking when it's appropriate to fill in, or if they ask a question, you don't just go, huh, wasn't listening. You actually listen and pay attention. Okay. But like I said, you know, if you do this and you build the habit of sitting with people and actually having the conversations properly, right, then it's a really great habit to have for all subjects, because if they get used to you just sitting and chatting about any day, everyday type things, then, and they feel really comfortable in opening up and being their best self. If it's weird or whatnot, it doesn't matter and stuff, because you are free to feel weird as well, and you're able to share your weirdness as well. So everyone around you begins to actually feel like they could express themselves honestly and openly, freely, without stress. Right? You can start creating that type of environment, that type of flow, that type of energy, then people are going to be more willing to actually have the difficult conversations with you just as peacefully. You know? So, yeah. So, like, try to make sure that, so for example, there's a few people that have said, oh, I'm driving and I can have the talk with you now and stuff. So no, I've actually gone to people's funerals because they were talking on the phone or doing something else, and I don't want to go through that type of thing again. So tell me when you're not on the road. Tell me when you're actually free to speak. I don't care if you got other people around and stuff that may have to wander past and stuff. That's okay. I just want to make sure that you're not just that you're safe, but you're able to pay attention, because, like, the stuff I teach can do you amazing things if you let it, you know? But you're not going to be able to let that in if the rest of your subconscious is looking for, you know, threats, cars, driving, mother-in-laws, you know, other threats out there on the road, you know? So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this one. If you got some value out of this, please do hashtag value. If you are watching the replay, please do hashtag replay. If you watch this live, please do hashtag live. And I will see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.